Behind me is St. Peter's Basilica in Rome's Vatican City, and to my right behind those buildings is the Sistine Chapel. The Sistine Chapel is one of the most famous art museums in the world, made so by its many famous paintings by Renaissance masters like Sandro Botticelli. But by far the most famous artist is Michelangelo Buonarroti, or better known as simply Michelangelo. Michelangelo's best-known paintings are on the chapel ceiling and depict biblical events from the book of Genesis, from God separating light and darkness to Noah and the great flood. But one of the ceiling's 9 central panels stands out in fame from all the others. You'd be hard-pressed to find someone in the Western world that has not seen or heard of Michelangelo's The Creation of Adam, in which God reaches out to give the spark of life to the first man. You've seen it reproduced in prints and posters, on coffee mugs and t-shirts. Sometimes the full painting, as I once saw it in full scale on the ceiling of a coffee shop in Brooklyn, and done very well, I might add, but oftentimes only the isolated hands of the 2 principals need be shown for instant recognition. It's amazing how such a small part of the overall work distills the essence of the work itself. It's arguably the most famous single work of art in the history of Western civilization, right up there with Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa and Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night. The Creation of Adam deserves its immense fame for its sheer beauty and artistic achievement alone. Yet it's not without controversy. Much has been written about its meaning based on what some perceive as cryptic elements. Was Michelangelo imparting some secret message in coded imagery? One theory is that the red shroud framing God and his entourage is intentionally shaped like the human brain and its parts, the trailing fabric being the brain stem and spinal cord. Michelangelo, an expert in anatomy, is saying, the theory goes, that God is bestowing the intellect upon Adam. Another theory claims the shroud is meant to represent a womb and the trailing fabric the umbilical cord. The scene portrayed in the creation of Adam is said to depict the verse in Genesis 2 where God breathed into Adam's face the breath of life. But we can clearly see that God is not breathing on Adam and that Adam is already alive. So that moment has passed, and Michelangelo, by choosing to ignore the literal Old Testament description, obviously intended to emphasize some other meaning. But just what is that meaning? It may be that the artist wanted to show that man is much more than flesh animated. We know that all life on earth is similar in that respect, from the amoeba to the gray whale. So Michelangelo perhaps is saying that God is now giving the first man that quality which makes him unique of all God's creatures. And the Bible tells us that this ingredient is the soul. We've learned something about the artist Michelangelo and his Sistine Chapel creations, but what does it all mean for you and me? Perhaps you don't believe in the literal interpretation of the Bible, as did Michelangelo. Nonetheless, I think the creation of Adam has significance for people in the 21st century, for it symbolizes a belief in a higher power, however you choose to characterize that power, from God made in man's image to a mystical, undefined embodiment of the source of life. Adam is an everyman, representing all of humankind. Adam's hand reaching out and God's hand offering forth very simply distills the relationship between creation and creator. Seen in this way, the universal gesture might be interpreted as a prayer of thanks for the gift of life. But I think there's also something else expressed here. There's an adage of faith that says, let go and let God. That unforeseen great things can happen when you give up your ego and accept guidance from a power greater than yourself. Michelangelo, by indulging his ego and resisting the Pope's order to paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling, was actually placing limits on his creative abilities. He thought, he was fearful, that he would be giving up his chance for art immortality by letting go of the Pope's tomb project, for that was to be his great monument for posterity. This tomb was to be grand indeed. It would be freestanding in the Basilica of St. Peter and contain no less than 40 statues. For a sculptor, it was a once-in-a-lifetime project. Acting through Pope Julius, God was actually inviting Michelangelo to stretch his creative limits, to give expression to his full artistic abilities and prove his faith. When he finally did let go and let God, he was inspired to create what has become one of the greatest artistic achievements of all time. You see, originally the Pope commissioned Michelangelo to only paint Christ's 12 apostles, 12 figures total, that's all. But he wound up painting over 300 figures. Michelangelo completely reconfigured the original concept once he fully committed himself to the project. And the Pope wisely let him do what he wanted to do, and that was nothing less than pictorially interpreting the biblical history of mankind's beginnings. As symbolized in his famous painting, Michelangelo figuratively reached out to God and received the touch of divine inspiration. At Hold On Art, we wanted to commemorate this monumental creation by crafting an item of personal art that everyone could wear to express their faith in God. We commissioned a jewelry artist to create a pendant to depict this moment in 3 dimensions, focusing only on the hands of God and Adam, which distills so beautifully the theme of the work. He made a miniature sculpture. When we saw this stunning 3D rendering, we thought of it as our humble tribute to one of the greatest sculptors who ever lived. And here is that pendant, cast in bronze and plated in 24-karat gold. Note the exquisite detail in the carving of the hands, all beautifully framed to accent this miniature work of art. We've turned the figures up slightly from horizontal to present God's hand as coming from above, a small alteration from the original. But remember, the actual fresco is viewed on the Sistine Chapel ceiling, so everything is from above. The touch of God will inspire you and be admired by others for as long as you own it, and it will never become outdated. It already has over 500 years of history behind it. Wear this elegant item of personal art as a prayer of thanks for life, or as a reminder that there is always a blessing to trusting in the Almighty. Let go and feel the touch of God.